Hello, everybody. All right, today we're talking about the most fundamental thing that we can talk about, essentially, especially when it comes to ethics, but knowledge as well. So, where does value come from? The classical debate is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? This means, is it objective in the sense that the object has all intrinsic value in itself alone, independent of any outside observers? Or is value determined completely by the subject and the feelings or intuitions of the subject, and they have no relation to the object, and it's just more of an internal thing, extrinsic to the object, but internal to the perceiver? So, this is the classical setup for value and how it is created. Before we go further, I want to talk about what values are. So, consulting the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, sort of the Bible of all philosophical knowledge and scholarship, there is an extensive article here about intrinsic versus extrinsic value. There, it's it's not that long. It'll take a little bit to read. So here are the table of contents, in a way. So it talks about what is, or talks about intrinsic value, what has it, what it is. Kind of weird that it starts with what has it before it talks about what it is, but it talks a lot about intrinsic value. And then it talks briefly about extrinsic value. And you'll see that there's not really a conclusion here. It's talking about what these things are. And if you read through this whole thing, as I did, you will realize that nobody has a good answer, that there's problems with both the intrinsic part and the extrinsic part. So before we talk about what is intrinsic value or what is extrinsic value, I would argue that we need to talk about what is value first. So, what is value? Well, values are things, there is a thing that living things give to help live their life. Non-living things have no need for values. They do not need values. They do not live in this sense. They just exist. But to live, we need values, and values are things that we want to have and to keep, because they aid our individual flourishing. This is what a value is. To talk about value in another way, it doesn't make sense. Values are given by living things to help the living thing live their life. Now, talking about this further, we have so the classical meaning of intrinsic versus extrinsic value. Just to be clear here, the intrinsic is that the value is inherent to the object and independent of any other factors, and the extrinsic is sort of the subject or perceiver gives all the value to the object. And then how is this justified? Well, based on our feelings or intuitions, and it's certainly considered just personal and not real, not objective in this standard. There is neither of these answer the question, right? And the Stanford article and others will also argue this. And basically, people will just give up and wallow in not knowing or accepting a vague answer because what can you do? But no, A is A. Things have identity. It is possible to identify. And how do we identify things? Using our rationality. Not just how we identify things. We use our rationality to identify and integrate things into concepts, abstractions, to understand the world. Rationality is our tool for living. Well, someone came and solved this. Her name is Ayn Rand. Updated the dichotomy into a trichotomy. The trichotomy is now understood as objective-subjective-intrinsic. Intrinsic being the classically intrinsic or classically old school objective understanding that the object has all the meaning inherent in itself, independent of anything. The subjective is the same, that it's just based, value is just based by the perceiver, but not really justified by anything other than a sort of feeling, and it's not true. But Ayn Rand came and gave us the third option, the objective value. And value is determined with the relation between the object and the perceiver. She doesn't use the word relation because relational tends to be used by people that are subjectivist. But I argue that this word should be used because it is the relation between the two things. But what are the two things? We have an object and we have a rational being, right? We are integrating and understanding things using our rationality. So we look at the characteristics of an object, and then we give it a value based on how it pertains to our flourishing as a rational being, as a living being, more specifically. And this can be justified rationally. It's not that, oh, I feel that it is. No, I give you a rational argument. For instance, a rock, let's say. A rock has no intrinsic value on its own, as we discussed. Non-living things have no need for values. To say that a rock has some sort of an intrinsic value basically starts with Plato and his idea of the forms, that there's perfect forms they have this inherent value, and how we know the value of things is we just recognize it, like kind of a priori from our previous life, and we just sort of remember or recollect both concepts and values and all these things. That's the only way to really make sense of this, and that doesn't make any sense. So the updated version is that the rock, for instance, the value is justified as the relation between itself and myself. Let's say I'm the one perceiving the rock. Well, the person that is perceiving it depends also. So a stonemason will give a value to the rock on perhaps how well it can be used to build a wall, let's say. And how will that value be determined? Well, by rational argumentation. He can rationally say that this is a good size or a bad size, whatever it might be. Let's say that it's a good size. It's about this, and the stonemason is looking for these size rocks for his wall. And he could give you a rational argument about its value. This value is determined by the relation between the two, rationally. Objectively, you could say. Now, people might shudder at this. This isn't objective. This is what you think. It's like, no, it's not about what you feel. It's about determining things objectively using your rationality. We can claim that the rock exists objectively, and we do that by giving a rational argument that I can feel it, I can see it, and this is the concept of a rock, and we do that rationally. It would be really weird if we said that the value cannot be determined rationally and objectively. As much as it exists as an objective object, its value can also be objective. Now, the stonemason determined that this rock has a good value for being part of the wall he's building. Now, let's say me as a rock skipper comes along, and I give the value, say this rock has very low value, or it's bad value in terms of being able that I can skip it across the water. Then I give you the argument that, well, it's too heavy. I'd have to throw it so hard and I wouldn't be able to do that, so it won't skip. That is also a rational argument about the value, but it's contextual. Of course, the context always matters. We cannot drop the context and make any sense of anything. So keeping the context of either building a wall or skipping it as a rock, we can rationally argue the value of the rock. And this is determined objectively. This is Ayn Rand's greatest contribution to philosophy, this understanding of how value is determined. It solves a millennial-long problem of where does value come from? And it is it does so rationally and objectively. We don't need our feelings or our intuitions to talk about the value of it. We use reason, we use rationality, talking about the relation between the object and the subject. We can This is part of the integration. We need to integrate things. They cannot be separate and and under and we cannot derive any understanding just looking at everything separately. We need to integrate them. We need to form abstractions. We need to build up knowledge. We need to use induction. This is the only way that we can create meaning. So I have written the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and I can read actually what I have written to them so you guys can all know. And I'm awaiting a response. I will do another video once I get a response. So I say, it seems clear from both my years of study and from your article specifically that no one can justify completely either the intrinsic or extrinsic view of value. It could be characterized classically as objective or subjective value. Objective meaning that the object has value intrinsic to itself and undetermined by any subject/observer of the object. And subjective meaning that the perceiver/subject determines the value of the object in a sort of feelings or intuitions-based way. This classic dichotomy has been updated into a trichotomy of objective, subjective, intrinsic understanding of value. The intrinsic part is understood in the classical way of the object having all value inherent in itself, and subjective being the subjective part being understood also in the classical way of the perceiver giving value to objects based on what the perceiver feels intuitively. But the added objective part understands value as being what the conscious perceiver values the object as in relation to both the characteristics of the object and of the perceiver, and this value is determined rationally. It is not universal, but universizable, using rational principles related to individual flourishing. This understanding of objective value was first formulated by Ayn Rand and is the basis of her philosophy of objectivism. My question is twofold. Does Rand not solve the intrinsic or versus extrinsic value problem? And if you don't believe she does, why is her solution not at least mentioned in the article and then supported or refuted? It seems very strange that Rand's solution is simply ignored. I must know the reason for not considering her formulation. I signed it best, Dylan. So this is where we are in this. I'd like to know what you guys think about this. It could be that you have never heard of this, and sure, I've argued with this on Facebook with some people. They accuse me of hair splitting, but I assure you this has nothing to do with hair splitting. This has to do with laying foundations. This is understanding reality, and rationality is our tool for understanding reality. It is our mind uses rationality to help us know what is knowledge, help us to know what is real, and it also helps us know what to do. This is the realm of ethics. So to understand the value of things, we need to understand kind of all three of these branches of philosophy. We have to have an integrated view. I believe that the objective view is an integrated view, and it is the best answer we have. There is certainly work to be done in the margins, the small improvements, but first we must accept, or rather reject, the old school intrinsic versus extrinsic value theory and accept that there is a sort of relational, context-based value that can be rationally identified and objectively understood. First, we must accept this, and then we can build. So I hope you enjoyed me actually thinking today. If you think I was thinking badly, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.